Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, the podcast where we explore the origins and the development of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters throughout the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. If you're a regular listener, you'll be aware that we've done a couple of issues of Brave and Bold. Very recently we did issue 75 where Batman teamed up with Golden Age superhero The Spectre under a gorgeous Neil Adams cover. And this week we are doing Brave and the Bold issue 76, following issue Brave and the Bold, in which Batman teams up with Golden Age superhero Plastic Man under a gorgeous Neil Adams cover.
Yes.
Now, obviously we've done a few issues of Plastic Man's own comic. The most recent one we did issue 7, that the Plastic Man who we'd encountered previously had actually been the son of a Plastic Man who had previously been active. We weren't sure if it was the Earth 1, Earth 2 or Earth whatever, but obviously, as we said, the letters page told us to more or less consider the fact that he was on his own Earth. So this is the first time we've really seen Plastic Man interacting properly with another superhero. So doubtless we will have a little bit of speculation about which Earth this could be taking place on.
Oh yes.
But bearing in mind, because this is Brave and Bold, this is a comic where there is a Chinese Year of the Bat, which is something that, as we learned, did not exist in real life. So basically anything could happen in the next little while. Do you want to tell us about the cover to B&B 76?
Certainly shall. We've got a dynamic shot of a skyscraper, and Plastic Man is at the top of the skyscraper, it looks like, and he's giant, and he's all falling apart. All bits of plastic tendrils are all coming off him. He looks as if he's in a bit of bother, and part of him's coming down over the form of Batman, who's fighting, grasping the collar of the bad guy who we'll discover is called the Molder. And the Molder is shooting up at Plastic Man, and that could possibly be causing Plazy's troubles.
Yes, he's firing a sort of ray gun. There's a little burst of blue energy, well, quite a big burst of blue energy that's striking Plastic Man, and Plastic Man looks a bit pained, and Batman looks very worried. Very dynamic, very exciting cover. Neil Adams, man, amazing.
This is one of the earliest 1960s comics I ever got.
Right.
So I'm really looking forward to jumping into this.
When did you acquire it? Can you remember?
In the 80s.
In the 80s.
So
well, I discovered when I dug this one out in preparation, I bought my copy from Darryl Jones at Silver Acre, which means at some point, I'm guessing this could have been late 90s or early 2000s probably when I got this.
And at the top, we've got 3 amazing logos. We have the Brave and Bold logo, as it says, the Brave and Bold presents Batman, and it's Batman with his classic logo with his cape around him and his face poking out from behind the cape, and Plastic Man, and it's the Plastic Man logo that we've seen recently on his title.
Yep. I love the way that the Plastic Man logo has been placed so it pops out against Plastic Man's gloop.
Yes.
It's quite a crowded, busy cover, so doing that means there's room for the logos. Yeah.
Indeed, and at the bottom there's a bubble caption that says the name of the story, which is Doom, what is thy shape?
Doom has dynamic, slightly scary looking lettering, and what is thy is a bit more straightforward, and shape is a bit more, I would say, groovy looking.
Yes, definitely.
And it's also coloured in yellow, whereas the rest of the text is in red. It's very interesting. So by this point, Brave and the Bold is now, from here onwards, a Batman team-up book.
Yes.
Neil Adams himself will illustrate a few stories coming very soon. We won't be doing any of them, unfortunately, because they don't fall into a remit. But we'll certainly have a few more of his covers to talk about. Shall we dive straight in?
Yes, this is a Bob Haney story with Mike Skowski art, so expect a wild ride.
Absolutely. So, the running page is a large caption box at the top. It's a little Brave and the Bold logo. The Brave and the Bold presents Batman and Plastic Man, which is nice. And then we have a little text box underneath that says,
"They said it couldn't be lived, told, or drawn. What? The team-up of Batman and Plastic Man in one great blockbuster. We spent a fortune and at least 10 minutes to find out who they really were. And guess what? They don't exist. So that sly, fantastic Plastic Man and the Cape Crusader lived it. And here we tell it in wondrous word and pulsating picture. The epic of the most amazing threat Gotham City ever faced. When even the 2 mighty superheroes could only gasp, Doom, what is thy shape?"
Gosh, and again, Doom is rendered in a slightly scary way like it is on the cover. That caption box is kind of giving me the fear. I wonder if we're kind of like dripping backwards into Batman TV territory.
Yes, well, it is Bob Haney, and he does like being zany.
He pure does. So yes, here we go then with issue 76 of Brave and the Bold, published on December the 26th, 1967. It's the final comic from 1967 that we'll be doing, and I wonder if any of our listeners bought it on the racks.
Gosh.
On Boxing Day.
Please
let us know. So, under the story title, we have a dynamic half-page opening splash panel that shows Batman in a bit of trouble. We're obviously in a subway tunnel. There's a sort of gloop that Batman is caught up in. It covers the tracks, goes up the side of the wall. There's a train rushing towards. The baddie who Pete told us earlier is called the Molder. He was a green overall outfit, green leggings, green top. He's orange boots, orange gloves, an orange cape, and a weird helmet that comes over his face, and there's a little detail at the top. His face is clear, so his actual features aren't obscured. It's not like he's wearing a mask. He's standing basically side on in the wall, almost as if he's a Spider-Man power and can stick. So the train is roaring towards us, and as the Molder stands there, he's saying, "Nothing can save the great guardian of Gotham now. So say I, the Molder." Ha 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 ha! And from the train there is a scream that says, and another passenger remarks,
"Blocking the way! It's Batman! We're going to crash into him!"
Bats is at the foreground of the panel. It almost looks as if addressing the camera. He looks very riled, so we'll see how long it takes before we reach this part in the story. Over the page then. The caption says,
"At the Second National Bank of Gotham City, a sleek, low-slung GTO jams disc brakes beside a window teller."
Yes, drive-through banking.
Gosh.
Who knew there was such a thing? So a very sleek-looking sports car, the registration plate NY13-17. We can see a young lady within this kiosk. There's a cash register beside her. There's a gentleman behind her, obviously another member of staff. There's obviously a kind of speaker system thing going on, because when you hear the girl from inside the kiosk saying, "Making a deposit, sir?" In panel 2, a voice comes from the car and says,
"No, baby, I'm making a withdrawal."
"Eek! The mirror! Changing into a grabbing hand!" And we can see that basically the wing mirror has a hand stretching out from it, and it's making a grab for a bag that's on the kiosk desk. In the next panel, the teller has obviously fainted, and she's being attended to by a male colleague who says,
"Great gravy! There were thousands of dollars in that payroll."
The panel also shows in the background the car zooming off. So they obviously pulled the money and grabbed it out and managed to squeeze it through that tiny little opening. And as the car zooms off, it's being fired after by a policeman who is exclaiming, "Don't worry, our computer guardian system has made a complete record and description of that car. It won't get far." Okay, so we finally arrive at the bottom of page 2, and the caption says,
"Sophisticated electronic circuits hum, and within split instants on the radar scope of an even sleeker, lower-slung vehicle."
We're inside the Batmobile, listeners. We can see many knobs and switches and dials. There's a little screen actually showing the fancy orange sports car that was outside the bank kiosk, and a little radio voice is coming through on Batman's little speaker, and it's saying, "Getaway car last seen heading west on Gotham Expressway." This is great, because you don't actually see Batman. You see the steering wheel. We see his hand on the gear stick. This is a super cool introduction. Batman has some dialogue, and he says,
"There it is, heading right for the intersection ahead. I'll just intercept him there with that exact electronic image. I won't get the bank heist car mixed up with any other. Go, little Batmobile."
Wowza. Top of page 3 now, the caption for the first panel says,
"A grind of 5 on the floor gears as bulletproof tires scorch the macadam, and the famed Batmobile builds revs like they were going out of style."
Gee whiz, man. This is like the most. So, this very dynamic panel shows the car that just robbed the bank coming down from an exit ramp. Batman is coming along underneath the motorway. He's coming up behind. And Batman says,
"Another 100 yards and I'll head him off at the pass, partner."
However, in panel 2, we have a caption that says,
"But suddenly..."
and with a burst of energy, well, it needs a sound effect or something, because the fancy sleek sports car transforms into an ordinary red van. The caption for panel 3 on page 3 says,
2 moments later,
we're with Batman inside the Batmobile as he beholds the van in front of him, a little red van that has a sign on the side that says, "Schultz's Delicatessen, we deliver." Batman observes,
"What the... a panel delivery truck? But what happened to that fast getaway buggy? I don't get it. According to the radar blip, the heist car was the only vehicle in the area, but that truck can't be it. All that electronic gadgetry must have goofed."
We've a bit of a slow dissolve here at the final panel of page 3, and a caption that says,
"That's a wrong-o, Batman, for high above, observing your confusion."
We see the Molder, as we already described. He looks slightly overweight, green outfit, orange gloves, boots. It looks like some sort of dial on the wrist of his right glove. The weird helmet that doesn't cover his face. And he's perched on top of a building, in fact on a sort of bat-shaped gargoyle. And he's saying, "Ha ha! The great Batman is puzzled by what I, the Moulder, have wrought." So, as we arrive at the top of page 4, the Moulder has twisted his cape around the bat gargoyle and is almost sort of abseiling down the side of the building. And as he does this, he says, "But then, perhaps he hasn't heard of plastic with a memory. The robbery car's body was first a truck. With a quick remoulding job, it became a sports model. Then, as Batman was about to intercept, it remembered its original truck form and regained that form instantly. Batman does not know that we live in the plastic age. Yes, mankind has existed through the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Steel Age. Some call this the Atomic Age, but they are wrong." He continues to abseil down, firing little grappling hooks that he's firing out from his gloves.
Yes.
He's leaping onto another building, and he continues to say, "It is the age of plastic, the most versatile material of all. It can be lighter than paper, stronger than steel, assume any shape, and even invent a host of new forms." Who could he be describing here? Anyway, we now see the Moulder hanging off the side of a building, which is handily labelled warehouse, in a very Batman 66 TV show type way. He's using some of his plastic grappling hooks to keep him in position. His cape's hanging down, and he's observing a van driving into the warehouse. And he continues to say, "Now, plastic can even think, remember, and obey. Yes, hail to the age of plastic, and I, the Moulder, its master. Ha 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 ha!" The Moulder swings down and lands beside the van. The window to the van is open, and obviously it says Goon inside, bearing the bag that he stole from the bank kiosk. And he hands it to the Moulder, saying,
"It went smooth, Moulder, smooth as..."
"Plastic, you dolt? Of course. For my plans, my technique, and my great ally, the plastics, are going to revolutionize crime and all human behaviour."
In that close-up, he really looks like Owlman of the Crime Syndicate, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, very much so. Maybe he's the whichever Earth equivalent it is.
Maybe, his real identity is what Owlman's identity is on Earth 3. Interesting. Interesting. Anyway.
So, top of page 5. We're now inside the Moulder's den. There's a big vat to the left of this panel. You can see a big pipe and there's orange liquid plastic streaming out of it. On the front of the vat are heavy, large, human-style shapes, obviously maybe perhaps moulds, that the plastic is being turned into.
They look a bit like Gort from...
They do.
The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah.
Yes.
Think of that, listeners, if it helps you visualise them. And I mean, this is the most generic supervillain costume I've ever seen. At least the MF Enterprises guys, turned out and were their best smart casual.
That's true, yes.
This guy's quite lazy.
Nice cravats and things.
Yeah. And jumpers and shirts and smartly pressed trousers. Immaculate facial hair. So the moulder is operating his equipment. He's got one hand on a wheel and another on a button, pouring the plastic into a mould. And as he's doing all this, he's saying to no one in particular, "Now, for the next great event of the age of plastic, the moulding of a very special batch of polymer plastic, conditioned with DNA and biogenetic plasma, thus implanting in the finished forms inherited reactions and synapses." We see now that the moulds swung open in the front of the vat, and looming out are these sort of... There's no other way of putting it. They look almost like shop window dummies. They're almost featureless. They're humanoid shape. And I'm wondering now if Robert Holmes read this issue of Brave and the Bold before he wrote Spearhead from Space. Were you having that same thought?
Yes. Could this be the Earth 1 equivalent of the Autons?
Yes.
Doctor Who reference, folks. There we are.
Yep. Anyway, the moulder continues. "In brief, I've created thinking, lifelike beings who can do anything I bid them to. The plastoids. Forward march!"
Not long after, in a subway train...
Yeah, we see a bunch of commuters sit with their newspapers and their hats and obviously travelling. There's an advert in the background for cigarettes on the wall that just says smoke.
That's
awful,
shocking,
isn't it? And there are half a dozen of the plastoids that the moulder has just created. They're now wearing identical purple overalls, a bit like the identical overalls that the Autons and Doctor Who all wore. And the plastoids are all standing, holding on to the hoops, the rings or whatever that hang from the subway carriage roof. One commuter, chap in a suit with a newspaper, remarks to the chap next to him,
"Look at these weird bozos."
And the other guy, who's a man wearing a hat, says,
"Must be a publicity stunt."
Caption name for the next panel.
Suddenly...
And a lady, wearing a pillbox hat and pearl necklace, screams, "Eek! They've seized us in plastic tentacles! Yeah, the plastoids have moved forward, and all of the commuters are caught up and wrapped around with these plastic tentacles that are emerging from the plastoids. The man in the hat is saying,
"Robbing us! Help!"
and another man who was probably on the other side of the carriage exclaims,
"No! Help!"
So, tentacles, eh? Plastic. Dear Doctor Who magazine, did you think? Anyway, now at the top of page 6, the caption says,
Once again, the call goes out, and, responding of course, Gotham's Guardian.
Yes, this is amazing. We're still in the subway. We can see the plastoids running from the subway train, which is ground to a halt, and whirling in from the left in a sort of small one-man helicopter, which I can't imagine was very safe to use in an underground tunnel, is Batman. Batman can see the plastoids running away, and he says,
"There go those weird robot subway thieves. I'll flag them down easily in the Whirly-Bat." Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Earth 2 podcast debut of my favourite bat vehicle of all time, the Whirly-Bat. I love the Whirly-Bat. Out of everything that Batman's got, it is my favourite thing. It's basically a collapsible one-man helicopter you can fold up and throw it in the trunk of your car. It is phenomenal.
So he probably used a normal way to get into the tunnel and then unfolded it and assembled it and switched it on and tightened it all up with Allen keys and all that stuff.
It's also known as the Bat Gyro or the Batcopter.
Yes, I've heard of both of those, yeah.
It first appeared in Detective Comics 257.
Right.
And it will pop up again. It pops up in a couple of stories we're going to be covering later in Brave and Bold.
Okay.
But genuinely, it's my favourite method of transport for
Yes.
Batman. It's phenomenal. It got a silencer mode quite early on, so it's not as obvious or obtrusive as you would think.
Right.
It's basically a quick, fast, easy way for him to get around. It's
See.
been used fairly recently as well. It was used in the Hush storyline as well.
Okay.
And I say fairly recently as we call things that are recent.
in the
20
David
years ago.
Steele and Peter Watson sense of meaning at any point in the last 20 years.
So yes, Whirly-Bat, I love it. And it's a crime that when, I think it was Eagle Moss did all those bat vehicles, they never did a Whirly-Bat.
Right.
I was absolutely gutted.
Did you contact them and say that you'd like one?
No, because I assumed it would automatically happen because it's such a major bat vehicle.
Yeah.
Also, the Whirly-Bat has got a couple of wheels at the bottom, so it can move around on ground in
Right.
a limited capacity. So yeah, it
Interesting.
is really cool. But basically, he just collapses it down and throws it in the trunk of the Batmobile, and there you go, it's there.
Right.
It's fantastic.
It sounds like the sort of thing that John Pertwee's Doctor Who would have loved to use.
Totally.
This issue is obviously a massive influence on John Pertwee's Doctor Who.
Back to the story.
Yes, it's interesting actually, because I was about to say, you're saying that's your favourite bat vehicle because this next panel, panel 2 of page 6, is possibly my favourite panel that we've ever mentioned in the podcast. Panel 2 is a caption that says,
"But as the tiny copter flits around a bend in the tracks."
and we have a shot, obviously from the point of view of someone standing on the platform. Now, there are pillars with the number 24, so does that mean it's 24th Street, or the station is number 24, or it's platform
24th Street, yeah.
Yeah. Zooming in from stage left is Batman. Now, I want to say, you can kind of tell it's Mike Zakowski because the detail in the railway station is minimal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a doorway, obviously. There's no hint of any posters. It's very... If Wes Anderson made a Batman movie, this panel would be a shot from that movie. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean now.
So anyway, Batman flies in from the left saying,
"Gone. Those robots have vanished. Nothing here but a deserted subway stop."
he gets a close-up in the next panel, and he says,
"What's happening in Gotham? First, that bank heist car vanishes. Now, those robots and their loot. Wait a minute. There's no subway station at 24th Street. Those station pillars, they're phony."
yes, a great shot of the Bat Gyro taking a different angle here. And he continues in panel 6.
"Now they're changing shape, back to those weirdo robots."
Oh gosh, yeah. You see the plastoids emerging and forming from the pillars. It's very dynamic, very exciting. Top of page 7, first panel. Batman says,
"This time I'll be ready for any of their quick change tricks. They must be some kind of fantastic plastic."
yes, he's hovering above them now in his Whirly-Bat or the Batcopter, and they're all running sort of underneath him. They can see him, that much is evident. So yes, so basically they ran out of that tunnel, he turned the corner, and they've turned into the pillars so they can get away from him, and he's flown beyond, come back, they've changed back too early, etc. Right, okay, that's fine. So panel 2 of page 7, above Batman, hanging by his legs from a support beam, it's the Molder, who's watching, and he says, "Right, Batman, they are special plastic, and so is this." And with a split out of a little nozzle on the top of his helmet, and if you turn him upside down, he is grotesque. That's a face
Yes.
only a mother could love. Out of this little nozzle, well, the caption helps us out here because it says...
And as the Whirly-Bat flits into the gushing mass of plastic...
So yeah, it seems that the moulder scooshes some form of plastic from the nozzle in the top of his head. That's weird. Where does he keep it? That's what I want to know. Is it from it or nothing?
In the cape, who knows?
Yeah.
Tanks in the
It's
cape.
fascinating. So yeah, we now see that Batman, the final panel of page 7, is caught in this onrushing, gooey flow. And he cries,
What? I'm being hit by a plastic deluge, and it's hardening.
gosh. So we arrive at the top of page 8. We see that Batman is completely caught up in the gloop. We see that the moulder's costume is actually stretched out behind him and attached to the overhead support beams, and he's swinging down. His plastoids are running into the tunnel ahead of him, and he crawls back to Batman saying, Yes, Batman, the fastest hardening plastic ever made. It has you trapped like an insect. Come, my pets, I believe I hear a train coming. Ha 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 ha! Caption for the next panel.
A few moments later...
Basically, we're on the roof of a subway train as it hurtled towards Batman, who's trapped in the plastic goop. Batman is thinking,
Oh, the Uptown Express, and I'm worse off than a slow local on the same track.
and then this panel is rounded out with a caption that says,
Looks like the Caped Crusader will be derailed for eternity. Is there no room, no future for Batman in the age of plastic? Has the moulder triumphed where so many other villains have failed? Lo, all shall be answered in Part 2, which explodes on second page following.
The rest of this page is rounded out with an advertisement for a monogram model of the Boot Hill Express. Old Deadeye says, have fun, get a new cookie car kit. And it's a skeleton, and it looks very much like something that perhaps the Munsters would drive.
Yes.
Anyway, so now we arrive at the top of page 9. And the caption says, Part 2,
Doom,
what is thy shape? And the caption that says,
You're tired after a hard day, jammed into the Uptown Express with other job-weary Gothamites when blocking the way is none other than...
and one of the passengers exclaims,
Batman!
and one of the other guys says,
It must be some kind of new subway ad.
and then a very attractive young lady says,
Ah, it's no ad. We're going to ram him.
yep, because they can all see through the window of the train. Batman, caught up in the gloop. The caption for panel 2 says,
Suddenly...
yes, well, stretching round from behind the train and coming in front is a big, long red arm with a large hand at the front, and someone inside the train says,
That man's arm, stretching out, out. And a second voice says,
crazy, what's happening here? And then with a boing sound effect in the final panel, we see that the big hand has stretched around, caught onto another support beam, and caught the train in its tracks, literally, just before it collides with Batman, who's still struggling with the goop. Gosh, how exciting. Now, who do you think the big hand belonged to, listeners?
Let's find out.
Let's find out. Over the page, top of page 10, and revealed, it's Plastic Man. He's drawn his hand back in, turned it into a sort of hammer, and he's breaking at the gloop to get Batman free. From inside the train, a man in a suit says,
Batman saved by Plastic Man. What a ride. And the second guy says,
I like Fun City, but this is too much. And then another passenger very wryly observes,
Probably raise the fare after this.
awesome. So the next panel, Batman is free from the gloop, and he says,
Well, I'll be a superhero's uncle-in-law. Plastic Man, where'd you pop from?
Plaz replies,
Greetings, Batman. I was tracking a super baddie called the Moulder. His trail led to Gotham and right to this spot.
Batman replies,
The Moulder. So that's the character behind all this fantastic villainy.
the next panel's very interesting, very moody shot of Plastic Man and Batman in conversation. Big shadow's been cast, throwing Batman's silhouette against the wall of the tunnel. Very effective, very moody. And the conversation between the two heroes continues.
Check. He was a plastics research expert who went berserk after a lab accident. He's brilliant, cunning, and sick. His command of secret modern plastic powers make him one tough foe.
Batman replies,
So I've noticed, Plastic Man, but now we're a team. We'll mold this moulder into shape for a jail cell or a hospital.
now we see the moulder hunched and hiding up above, looking down on the two of them, and he's thinking, bad news. Plastic Man and Batman working together against me. The age of plastic faces its first crisis. Crisis, there we go.
Mhm.
I must destroy them both, utterly, now. It'll be the supreme test of my powers, of the fitness of plastic to rule the world. We arrive then at top of page 11, and the Crepe Crusader and the Pliable Paladin still chatting away. Batman says,
Okay, Plaz, let's get cracking after this Mulder before he pulls some other incredible plastic crime.
He already has. We're too late, unless I can just knock you away. There!
And Plastic Man suddenly stretched out his right arm and knocked Batman backwards. Batman exclaims,
Hey!
Falls to the ground. In the next panel, Plastic Man explains,
You're shocked, Batman, but not half as shocked as if you'd gotten into your sky taxi with this hotline touching its metal frame.
We see that Plas has leaned forward and pulled out a sparking live wire which had obviously been connected by the Mulder to Batman's Batcopter. Plas continues,
Being plastic, I'm a non-conductor.
Batman says,
Blazes, that means he's here, down here, the Mulder.
And in the next panel, the Mulder swings down in front of them from where his hiding place and swings back out again, really. Plastic Man stretches up, saying,
There he goes, and here I go after him.
Batman runs for his Batcopter, saying,
Be right with you, Plaz, now that the Whirly-Bat's unplugged.
Whirly-Bat's Unplugged was a best-selling album in the MTV series featuring acoustic performances by prominent musicians. But of course, the Whirly-Bats, no one ever heard of them, so they didn't do terribly well.
Fair enough.
The final panel of page 11 shows Batman zooming up again in his helicopter, and he looks back and he notices that Plastic Man doesn't seem to be coming with him. So Batman observes,
Wait, Plaz, you're going the wrong way.
and Plas, who's down on the ground stretching his hands out and grabbing again at some handy support pillows, says,
No, Batman, I'm just stretching the old plastic corpuscles.
and as we turn the page to page 12, he continues,
So I can make like a big rubber band.
and with a massive giant
Kaboing!
he springs forward. The caption says,
With amazing speed, the most unique superhero of them all hurtles after his foe.
yeah, with another
Kaboing!
Plastic Man emerges from the tunnel, following after the Mulder, who's running along the track ahead of him. Mulder looking back over his shoulder, saying, Plastic Man, he dares defy the Mulder? Then let him feel the full power of the very substance his own body is composed of. And as O'Brien stretches up above the Mulder, in a sort of weird zigzag shape, the Mulder fires some plastic goop again from the nozzle on his helmet. Plastic Man tries to avoid it, saying,
Hot jets of plastic, eh? So I'll make like a jet plane taking evasive action. Here a zig, there a zag. Here a zig.
and then the Mulder's blast connects with Plastic Man, and Plastic Man starts to fragment. Plastic Man says,
Yikes! Zigged when I should have zagged.
and the final panel of page 12 is absolutely horrifying. The Mulder is gloating as with a boing.
Boing!
Plastic Man, who's broken into 4 pieces, is cast away. He's snapped at the waist. We see his legs, we see one of his arms stretching away, we see his lower torso, we see his upper head and shoulders, and another arm goes flying. It's absolutely horrendous.
Yep.
Wow. The Mulder, gloating, says, Now that plastic buffoon is several rubber bands, all rebounding out of his control. Ha 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 ha! Top of page 13, caption says,
And as Plastic Man scatters around the city skyline...
Yep, zooming out of the rail tunnel behind the Mulder, Batman's on the Whirly-Bat. The Mulder sees him and says, So, Gotham's Cape Crusader comes. He too shall be a casualty of the plastic age. Panel 2, the Mulder exclaims, All jets on! And with a foot and a flrt, he starts firing more plastic from the nozzle on his helmet, from his wrist gauntlets, and even from some nozzles on the side of his legs.
It's bizarre.
It's grotesque. In the next panel, the Whirly-Bat is caught in this liquid plastic onslaught. Batman cries,
Holy confetti! Those plastic streamers entangling the Whirly-Bat. Got to turn on full power.
caption for panel 4 of page 13 says,
Go, little Whirly-Bat, go! But...
There's a whoop as the Whirly-Bat tries to get away from the plastic, but seems to get more and more tangled. The Mulder down on the ground says, Caught, ensnared like a fly in a web. So begins the age of plastic, with the defeat of not one, but 2 mighty superheroes. The next panel, the Mulder is firing another nozzle from his wrist and obviously creating some sort of rope so he can swing up and away. Batman has managed to get himself out of the flailing, falling Whirly-Bat and is hanging on to one of the strips of plastic that's spread across between the buildings. And Batman is saying,
Blast it! The Mulder is leaping away with a plastic assist. Even I can't keep up with that speed. Plastic Man, go find him! But where is he?
Top of page 14 now. Oh gosh, this is grotesque. We see Batman walking along the street. Under one arm, under his right arm, he has Plastic Man's torso and one of Plastic Man's legs. And under his other arm, he has one of Plastic Man's arms and his other leg. We can see lying on the pavement, Plastic Man's other arm, and poking out the top of a US mailbox, it's Plastic Man's upper torso with his head and shoulders. I don't mean his shampoo. As Batman approaches, he doesn't look too pained, it must be honest. Batman says,
"You're all over the place, Plas."
Plastic Man replies,
Check, Batman. I got a real quick tour of Gotham, but not the way I'd like it. I feel like Humpty Dumpty.
to which Batman replies,
"And I guess I'm all the king's horses and his men too."
The next panel, we basically see Batman fitting Plastic Man's arm back into place. Now, it's interesting because there's a clear dissection here that makes it look as if Plastic Man is just made of solid plastic.
Yes.
Very interesting. Do you remember that famous Secret Wars UK cover when with Captain America and Reed Richards and Logan? There's a massive explosion behind them and they've gone sort of X-ray style translucent, and you can see that Reed Richards' spine and arms, the bones, the skeleton sort of stretches within
All
him.
right, no. Don't
I'd
remember
always kind of thought of Plastic Man being sort of similar, apart from I suppose that time in the modern, in the David and Peter sense, JLA, when he was totally corrupted and they had to pick him up in bits from the ocean. Do you remember
that.
that?
Yeah.
There's a cover when he's getting poured out as gloop. I'd never really considered that he could just be broken into pieces and then reassembled. It's quite
Yeah.
horrible, isn't it?
Well, Plastic Man is more of a shape changer than, say, for
Mm.
example, Elongated Man. He's
Yeah.
more of a stretcher as
Yeah,
opposed to someone
right.
that actually physically changes. So
Yeah.
I think that
He'd
would
have to
apply
be-
for
He
him.
would have to be. I'd always just imagined his bones were sort of jelly, but this is
Certainly not at this period.
no. I mean, it's interesting the way he's drawn in this panel. He looks very much like Plastic Man Senior from issue 7.
Yes.
In fact, he looks like Zachary Levi wearing a pair of swimming goggles. So anyway, Batman is fitting Plastic Man's arm back into place, and the pliable paladin is saying,
The Mulder tried to send me airmail, but it looks like there is insufficient postage.
Batman says,
Enough with the jokes, Plas. We've got big trouble. The Mulder is gone. We don't know where and how he'll hit next.
Sorry, old caping cowl. Just put me together and we'll get after Mr. Mulder before he brews another batch of plastic power.
Now, at this point, I just want to say this definitely feels like there's some familiarity between
Yes.
Batman and Plastic Man here.
Yes.
You're all over the place, Plas. Old cape and cowl.
Mhm.
That definitely suggests some familiarity. And because this Batman has the yellow oval and the copter, and are we assuming that this is the Batman of Earth 1?
I would certainly say this is definitely
generally
the Batman of Earth 1.
Brave and Bold is Batman of Earth 1. So is this a first appearance of Plastic Man on Earth 1?
I would say yes.
Because this issue is being published contemporaneously with his ongoing series, does that then ergo mean that the slightly raised and frantic adventures of the Plastic Man that we saw in that comic could probably be this version of the same guy, which means are they maybe on Earth 1 as well?
I wouldn't say so. No, they definitely said they've got their own
Yeah.
Earth, so basically to ignore all that sort of thing. So this is, I believe this should be the first appearance
Of an Earth 1
of an Earth 1 Plastic Man, unless they're saying that the Golden Age Plastic Man stories, which came out in Police Comics and in Plastic Man's own title by Quality, unless they're saying that took place in Earth 1.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence to suggest
Yeah.
that. And also there's no Batman in those stories.
Of course.
So there's no previous relationship.
This is just presented as being Plastic Man full stop. There's nothing to say whether it's the son of the original. I'm presuming it's the guy that's generally been headlining his own comic, I suppose, because that's probably most likely. Interesting. We probably keep going with the story, I think. So again, there's a lot of this stuff that we can only formulate and theorise. It's very difficult to actually nail anything down. But to me, at least, as we probably agreed here, this suggests that this is an Earth 1 Plastic Man that Batman is very familiar with and had previous adventures with. Very interesting. So, panel 3 of page 14 has a caption that says,
Mr. Mulder is already doing just that, Plastic Man, for in the old abandoned warehouse.
Yes, we can see him working his controls again, and there's a sort of vat coming down from the ceiling, pouring some gloop into a big glass dish that's connected up to some other tubes. Looks like there's maybe a weird Bunsen burner underneath it, or steam coming off it. And we can see some of the plastoids standing looming in a doorway in the background. They're not Autons, honestly. The Mulder is operating the equipment, and he's saying, "These ordinary crimes, though performed sensationally, are not enough. Do not garner enough booty. The age of plastic demands great deeds, great heaps of loot, and these shall come to pass. And if Batman and Plastic Man still continue to give me trouble, I have an answer for them. There, my latest, greatest advance in plastic technology is completed." And we get a shot of some equipment here. There's some hissing and spitting. There's a robotic arm, fires some stuff from a nozzle into a container. The Mulder continues, "And what better place to test it than the streets of Gotham City, soon to be the first conquest of the Plastic Age.
Meanwhile, above those streets of Gotham, it's worried Guardian patrols.
Yep, we see Batman swinging along on a line. I wonder if that's the same Bat Gargoyle that we saw earlier on.
Could be.
We can see. Batman, as he swings along, and it's a terribly rendered panel, I must say, Batman is saying,
Quiet. Too quiet, as the hombres in the TV westerns always say. Where's Plastic Man patrolling? Can't spot him.
Top of page 15 now, caption for the first panel.
Where's the malleable Marvel patrolling? Well, far, far below.
We see a Gotham City Transport Authority worker walking along with a temporary bus stop sign over his shoulder, but it's clear to us that the bus stop's a disguised Plastic Man. So the busman's walking along. There's a great big cartoon rubbish bin on the pavement behind him, and he seems to be walking through an ill-defined orange void. It sounds like I'm being snide, but it's actually some very interesting work from Sikowski there, to be honest. The way the pavement is sort of rendered, it's almost minimal. It's very, very interesting. So the busman's walking along with Plastic Man as a bus sign over his shoulder, and he's saying, "The boss says bus number 4 ain't going this way no more. Gotta change the stops." And Plastic Man, in his disguise as the bus stop, thinks,
Didn't expect this when I made like this sign, but it's a good way to cover Gotham without arousing the Mulder's suspicions.
and speaking of the Mulder, the caption for panel 2 says,
At this very moment.
Yep, and we see the Mulder swinging in again above a massive domed building, using one of his special plastic tentacle type rope things with a massive gun in his hand this time, and he's saying, "H hour has struck, and what better place to begin than Gotham's heart and brain, the City Hall." Yes, the City Hall is the domed building. Panel 3 shows the Mulder. Presumably his cape must be attached to something and he's swinging in on it. It looks like he's hanging in midair and he's firing his big gun, which it looks as though actually, now that I look back at page 14, that was being removed from the vat by the robotic arm. In the foreground of panel 3, page 15, we see Plastic Man's head stretching and forming properly out of the bus stop sign, and he spots the Mulder and thinks,
The Mulder, hitting the City Hall with a cocoon of weird plastic.
and in the next panel, Plas takes on more of his own form and says,
Getting off, this is my stop, friend.
and the busman is appalled and screams, "Yow! The sign's alive!" as Plastic Man folds into normal shape and drifts away from him. Over the page then, top of page 16, Plastic Man is floating up in the air, almost in a sort of balloon shape, above the Mulder, and he says,
Hold it, Mulder. For a snake in the grass like you, a cobra-shaped shield should stop that plastic blitz.
Yes, that's obviously the shape that Plas is taking on. The Mulder, still floating on his plastic rope cape, exclaims, "Plastic Man, you fool! You've done just what I wanted you to do!" And he fires his big fancy plastic gun at Plastic Man. Plastic Man exclaims in the next panel,
Yipes! What's happening to me?
and very like on the cover, Plastic Man is losing all sense of a human shape. His head and his neck are still there, but his body is splurging out. There's no better way of putting it. Splurging out all over the place. And the Mulder, still swinging on his cape and floating in midair, says, "Very simple, you boastful buffoon. You are now saturated with a catalytic plastic which is infecting your very molecules, so that they will reproduce themselves endlessly. Yes, Plastic Man, you're heading for big things. Ha ha ha!" We have a closing caption for this panel that says,
And the Brave and Bold era is heading for bigger things in the blockbusting panels of Part 3, which kicks off on second page following.
The rest of this page is taken up with an advertisement for Lois Lane, which looks like a sketch of a Neil Adams cover. We have a text page which says some famous plastic men, which we might stick on the socials if we can summon up the energy. And we arrive then now at the top of page 17. A caption says, Part 3,
Doom, what is thy shape?
And we've a text caption that says,
Tidal wave, avalanche, earthquake. Gotham City's never suffered from any of these before, so there's no warning signal for what's happening right now. Plastic Man turned into an avalanching tidal wave of spreading plastic that makes the very canyons of the defenseless city quake.
Yes, this is astonishing. I wonder if it hurts.
I would imagine so. But then again, does he actually have any?
Yeah, he didn't seem to feel any pain when he was broken into bits earlier on.
True.
Yeah, so maybe he has no sense of... I wonder if he can even taste. Good grief.
Who knows?
Listeners, this is the Metaphysical Plastic Man podcast. Only 2 panels on page 17, both run the full length of the page. In the first one, the Mulder is still floating and hanging from his plastic cape, And we see that Plastic Man is spreading out further, tentacles of plastic reaching out, coil themselves around buildings. The moulder is saying, "You have lost control of yourself, you elastic clown, and now perform for the moulder, master of the new plastic age." Plastic Man says,
Tentacles! I'm shooting out tentacles that are thrashing the skyscrapers to bits. Fantastic! I can't stop myself.
and the caption for panel 2,
Just then,
"Thank goodness," Batman swings in on his line, and he says,
Mulder, reverse what's happening to Plastic Man or I'll tear you to bits.
Mulder, who's down below Batman from where Batman is flung in, with Plastic Man stretching out behind him in the background, Mulder looking up at Batman says, "Ha ha! Tear away, Caped Crusader. But not even I can reverse the catalyst. Once it has begun, Gotham City is doomed." Now this panel on page 18, the first panel, this is very, very similar to the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Batman is caught up to the Mulder. They're on the rooftop. They're each grabbing each other at the throat, basically. Batman's on top. He's trying to hold the Mulder down. The Mulder still has his gun in his hand. Plastic Man silent behind him, but still stretched up and horribly, horribly distorted. Batman has a hold of the Mulder, as I say, and he says,
You madman! What can you hope to gain?
"The complete domination of Gotham City, the first hostage of the plastic age."
Plastic age? Maybe, chum, but like every other age it will pass, and I'm going to end you and it right now.
If you look at your worthy fellow superhero Batman, you'll see he's about to end the Batman age. Ha ha ha! And in the next panel, final panel of page 18, this is horrendous. We see that Batman and the Mulder are now about to be completely subsumed, and it looks as though Plastic Man is just melting around them and over them. This is horrible. Batman says,
Plastic Man inundating us with a wave of seething plastic. If this is it, you'll go with me, Mulder.
"That's what you think, Batman." Over the page, and it seems that Plastic Man is now fully dissolved into fluid, and Batman's floating in it. The Mulder, as he floats up and flies up and away, he says, "While you grope and struggle like a drowning man, I simply break out by using my jets. Plastic against plastic, simple and efficient." Yes, so all the nozzles that are attached to his costume, like his gauntlets and his gloves and his legs, they're firing out basically, and he's sort of flying up out of the gloop. Batman says,
Blazes! I'm drowning, smothering, being scalded in this stuff.
"Scalded? So it's hot?"
Sounds like
Oh my
it.
god, so Plastic Man is basically melting. That's what he's done. This is horrendous. Panel 2, page 19, is a caption that says,
Now, as the human tidal wave of plastic rolls on, and on, and on.
Yep, the Mulder fires from one of his guns, firing a plastic line up to the aforementioned Bat Gargoyle so that he can swing away. All we can see of Batman are his gloves and his hands poking out from the Plastic Man gloop. And as the Mulder departs, he says, "The triumph is complete. Farewell, Batman. Farewell, Plastic Man." Gasp.
Has the plastic age truly triumphed? Do we now stand on the threshold of a time of terror and chaos beyond man's wildest fears? Let us go directly to the City Hall Tower for the first part of the answer.
This panel looks like it's been flown in from a 1950s Jack Kirby police comic.
Or a Strange Adventures issue?
Yeah, it's very bizarre, isn't it?
Mhm.
We're basically with Commissioner Gordon and a few of his officers. The first policeman who's there says,
We've zeroed in on Plastic Man, Commissioner Gordon.
And Gordon says,
"Keep firing. This old World War II gun stored here for patriotic parades is Gotham's only hope to break up that plastic nightmare." And we see that one of the other officers is basically staring down the sights of a large weapon that he's got on his shoulder, almost
Like a bazooka?
bazooka. So, panel 4 of page 19, there are only 4 panels on page 19, has a caption that says,
But as the first shells slam into the huge smothering mass that was the malleable Marvel,
yes, the shell with a giant
Blam!
blam sound effect collides with Plaz, and Plastic Man might be suffering here because he says,
Great polymers! Those shells! Knocking off pieces of me! No! Stop!
yeah, and we can see that chunks of plastic are being flung up and broken off. This is horrendous. My goodness, top of page 20, the caption of the first panel says,
next moment,
and with a whee and a wham, we can see another shell collides and Plastic Man breaks even further, and his head and his neck and part of his shoulders goes flying, and he exclaims,
Yow! There goes my better 100th!
"My goodness, this is bizarre." There is a caption, and it says,
the head and a hunk of Plastic Man flies across the stricken city to land inside an old warehouse.
yes, with a giant smash, we see Eel O'Brien's head flying through a window. He bounces onto some equipment, bounces again onto the floor, bounces another couple of times, and then collides with a jar. This is grotesque. And as he clunks into this jar, in this laboratory, Plastic Man says,
Huh? This place. It's the Moulder's lair.
it's very lucky that that's where he ended up. Anyway, we see his head lying on his bench, and it can see in the foreground there's a little jar, or a beaker, as Plastic Man says, with the phrase memory plastic written on it. And Plastic Man observes and says,
A beaker filled with liquid plastic solution. That may be it. That may be the answer to it all.
in the next panel, what's left of Plastic Man has sort of turned himself into a little worm, and it's inched its way up the side of the beaker. As he does so, he says,
Got to slither up this slippery beaker and reach it somehow.
Exerting his molecules to the utmost, PM stretches, slides, scrambles, shinnies, up, until...
Plaz has got his head over the rim of the beaker, and he's going straight into the liquid, saying,
Made it. Now to drink this stuff. Hardly my cup of tea.
Good grief. Over the page now, top of page 21, the caption for the first panel.
But as old Plaz pulls himself back up and out of the beaker,
We see a bunch of the plastoids running through the doorway. Plastic Man's head and shoulders in the foreground observe and say,
So far, so good. But I'll never get out of here till next week at this speed. The plastoids, maybe they'll be the help I need.
The caption for panel 2.
the plastoids help our shattered hero. Plaz must have really lost his head. Let's see what's coming next.
Yeah, in panel 2, the plastoids have all made a dive for what's left of Plastic Man. With a clump, they all collide and go down onto the ground. Plastic Man's voice pops out of it all saying,
Ow! Not all at once.
Panel 3, they've grabbed a hold. One's pulling at his hair, one's pulling at the side of his face, one's pulling at would have been his neck. They're all just stretching out his head. Oh, it's awful.
That's it. Tear me apart. Just try to tear me apart, you creeps.
Caption for panel 4.
Suddenly, as the remnant of Plastic Man is stretched,
Obviously, it reaches as far as it will go, because with a massive
kaboing!
Plastic Man's head goes flying back out of the window that it came in, and Plaz exclaims.
Thanks, boys.
Caption for the final panel, page 21, says,
Back across Gotham flies the rebounding chunk.
with a very hearty plop, Plaz's head has managed to reconnect with his body, which is still spread out all over the place, tentacles around and flowing and looking horrendous. And as he collides with his body, he says,
Perfect. I'm in contact with my other molecules, messed up though they be.
and as we arrive at the top of page 22, the caption for the first panel says,
Quickly, Plastic Man blends himself into his own main mass.
Yes, wonderful. And it's obvious that he's managed to regain a little bit of control, because we can see him returning almost to a more regular, normal, stretched out Plastic Man shape, starting to shrink down. And he remarks,
It's working. I'm shrinking.
well, caption for panel 2 of page 22 says,
While perched high above Gotham,
a nice aerial shot showing a skyscraper and the aforementioned bat gargoyle that we've seen earlier on. The Moulder is standing watching what's going on, and he says, What? It can't be. But Plastic Man is shrinking back. The city's being uncovered. Caption for panel 3.
within seconds, the great smothering cloud is no more.
Yeah, it's weird. You don't actually see that happening in these two panels. It's just quite a clear view.
Mhm.
I suppose it must be the view looking up at the Moulder. We don't actually see his point of view of everything shrinking down. But anyway. And then Batman is revealed, hanging on to the end of the bat gargoyle thing. And Batman says,
I'm being uncovered too, Moulder.
Batman! Hanging onto the ledge! You weren't smothered after all! Batman vaults up to be level with the Moulder on the final panel of page 22, saying,
No, friend, I just hung under that ledge like a bat. There was plenty of air trapped with me.
But now I shall finish you once and for all, for bats do not have 9 lives. We arrive then at the top of page 23.
With no room to dodge atop the narrow spire, Batman appears an easy target for the scalding, piercing jet of molten plastic.
The Moulder fires from his head nozzle with a splat sound effect, though Batman manages to head him off by grabbing the wing of the off-scene bat gargoyle and bending it round. Batman says,
This bat has 9 lives, Moulder.
You tricked me, but my next blast will get you.
That was your next blast, Moulder, and this one's mine.
And with a thud, Batman connects with a massive left-hander. And with an "Ugh!" the Moulder goes flying. In fact, in the next panel, we see him falling off the side of the building. Batman says,
"He's falling. I didn't want it this way. I had no choice. Poor, demented man. Nothing can save you now."
But then we see Plastic Man stretching out his giant left hand and catching the moulder. Plastic Man says,
"Nothing can save him except Plastic Man."
Phew, that was close. And so we arrive on top of page 24. Batman swings down a line to join Plastic Man on the pavement, who is holding the moulder trapped between the fingers of his still enormous giant left hand. As Batman swings down, he says,
"Plas, you're back to normal. How'd you do it? How'd you reverse your fantastic growth?"
"The moulder and a bit of luck did it. My head was blasted into his lab where I gulped some memory solution. By rejoining my main mass, I was able to saturate all my molecules with its properties, so they remembered my usual form and changed back to plain little old malleable me."
and a smiling Batman and Plastic Man in the final panel of the story. Batman offers his right hand to Plas to shake, and Plas bends his right arm up behind his neck and round to reciprocate the gesture. Batman says,
"Good thinking, Plas. Once that plastic avalanche was gone, the rest was easy. Glad you were on my team this time."
"Check. And since the moulder's age of plastic is over, maybe I'll start one of my own, but just for laughs."
"Great, Plas. I'm chuckling already."
and we have a final closing caption that says,
"So are we, because the regular adventures of Plastic Man and his own mag will heat up your funny bone, mold your mirth, and generally split your sideburns. Plastic Man, Batman, the brave and the bold. Read 'em ever, miss 'em never."
The
end. So, what did you make of that?
It was great. I think that final caption confirms that this is meant to be the same Plastic Man that we've been seeing in his own comic.
But we do know from the latest version of his own comic, he has got his own world. It's basically very woolly. This is very hip.
It's that brave and bold thing again, isn't it? If we're taking that the Batman with the yellow oval is always the Batman of Earth 1, then this suggests this is the Plastic Man of Earth 1, but the caption there seems to be saying, get more stories with this same guy in his own comic.
Yeah.
And they've already said in his own comic that they're on their own separate worlds. Either you disregard all that stuff completely, or this takes place on that Earth of Plastic Man's, and this is the Batman of that Earth.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Logopolis.
Indeed. Yes, so it could be. I mean, as you said, and as it stated there, there was a familiarity between the two characters. Also, the phrase that Batman used at the end, "Glad you were on my team this time," implied that there's some sort of antagonistic version, unless he's just talking about Plas being basically the blob and infesting the city.
Glad you're on my team this time. But I was thinking the same thing. Does that mean that maybe there's been some kind of conflict in the past when they've been? Maybe there was a Civil War style storyline on this Earth where Batman took one side and Plastic Man took another, or something similar, and they fell out over some kind of important issue.
Or maybe Batman had some kind of history with Eel O'Brien before he became Plastic Man, when he was back when he was a crook.
Yeah, that could be what he's referring to. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
No, I loved that. I mean, it was a bit of a perfect storm. I mean, it wasn't an overly complicated story. I think that Mike Sikowski's artwork was kind of perfect for it, really.
Yeah.
It rattled along. There was some brilliant stuff. Not the densest of stories we've ever done, compare it to one of the showcase ones or whatever. It was great fun. Yeah, I'm glad to finally have read it properly for the first time. So there's another story we're going to briefly mention that's in this comic. It's a reprint of a solo story for Robin called The Man Called 50/50, which is basically Robin up against a guy that kind of looks like Two-Face.
Yeah, for some reason they didn't use Two-Face. It's 50/50 Finlay. All his decisions are made on a 50/50 basis, where there's a toss of a coin, a cut of the cards, all that sort of thing. It's just basically a variation on Two-Face.
Yeah, I mean,
it's so weird.
Because Two-Face disappeared for quite a long time, didn't he?
Yeah, basically there were no appearances of Two-Face at all in the Silver Age. His last appearance was in 1953, 2nd of December. Batman 81 came out. That's classed as the first appearance of the Earth 1 Two-Face.
Okay.
But then he didn't appear again until 1971 in Batman 234.
That famous cover.
Yeah, and of course he's been a major staple of the Bat mythos since. So yeah, interesting.
So this story was originally published in Star Spangled Comics issue 128 in 1952. But it's very interesting that he's basically his costume is, he wears a suit, different colours split down the middle, one side of his face is in shade or painted black or whatever. The resemblance is immediate and uncanny. I suppose just worth mentioning as a curio, just because it's in the comic and it's quite interesting. So Batman and Plastic Man then. That was a lot of fun. I was
Mhm.
really quite concerned at points that, as we said during it, that it was quite horrific what they were putting Plas through. They put him through the ringer, so to
It did
speak.
indeed. Yes. And the Mulder's a really interesting character, which sadly, this version of the Mulder does not come back at all.
Right.
Which is a shame. However, the Mulder has a bit of a legacy himself, because in Flash issue 253, there's a character in it called the Mulder, who's a villain. But it turns out it's actually Ralph Dibny, Elongated Man, who is going through a bit of a mental breakdown because he drank gin gold while the Flash was carrying him and running at super speed, and that had an effect on his body
Oh,
chemistry.
right.
And it also affected his powers. He couldn't actually stretch himself, but he could touch things and make them mould and stretch,
Okay.
which
Blimey.
gave us a really cool cover to Flash issue 253. And weirdly, bearing in mind that was actually Ralph Dibny, Elongated Man,
Yes, I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Yes.
he turns up in issue 10 of Crisis on Infinite Earth in a panel. Now, here's the thing, that character didn't exist. He's only in that story, and that character was never used again. So what we could maybe surmise is that the original Mulder did return and perhaps adopted the second Mulder's costume. Maybe he knew Paul Gamby in Central City and maybe he got a costume made up. Who knows? I think that's a possibility if you want to tie all this together. Why not? Why not?
Yeah, the Mulder in Crisis, and essentially, is it the Mulder who we've just seen but in the wrong costume, so having the same powers and...
You can't see it. It's basically in one big panel.
Right.
So you don't
right.
really
So
see him.
obviously George Perez didn't realise that this was Ralph Dibny in disguise.
Yeah.
He's probably just given the cover to Flash 253 and said, draw this guy.
Or
Right.
even just like himself, just thought, who looks interesting?
Unless it's another version of the Mulder from a parallel Earth that had
Could
that
be.
costume, and because this is Crisis on Infinite Earths after all. But I suppose there's only a few Earths left at that point in the story.
Yeah.
So who's to say even maybe wasn't from Earth X, or maybe even from Earth 2 or something? It might have been just a costume power name coincidence thing. Could have happened.
Thought it's worth mentioning just now because,
yes.
to be honest, by the time we get to Crisis on Infinite Earths 10, there'll be a lot more to talk about.
Yes.
That.
Yes. I can't imagine us doing full cast read-throughs of each issue of Crisis.
Who knows?
It'll probably be summaries and key points of dialogue, I suppose. But we'll find
figure
out that.
We'll do it page by page.
Yeah, we'll figure that out eventually. Yes, each page of Crisis on Infinite Earths will get its own weekly episode.
Or a daily panel.
Oh, gee whiz.
Gosh, willikers.
I know. I can't even think about it, to be honest.
Sadly, there is no letter column for Brief and Bold at this point. Literally, the next issue is the first one that gets a regular letter column. So unfortunately, we don't have any reader reaction.
That's
for
a
this
real
story at the
shame,
time.
isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a real shame. I would have loved to have heard what people thought of this at the time.
Yeah, it's just such a fun story. It's so good. It's light-hearted. It's fun. It's entertaining. It's quite horrific at some points. As I said, it is basically Plastic Man becomes the Blob.
Yes.
So it's weird and very kind of zeitgeisty. It's still a hangover from the 60s TV show because most of that had gone.
Yeah, well, it was still on by then in 67, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was still on, but most of the
hype had all died down.
yeah. I mean, it's calmed down in JLA.
Yes, absolutely. And we're a long way from, and I'm going to mention it again, Hal Jordan putting a hand on the hip and saying, camp-style Green Lantern. Yes.
Yeah. So
full back tattoo of that now, listeners, I've got. You wouldn't believe. Yeah, I'll post it around you on the social.
So yeah, it's progression, but Bob Haney just loves this stuff. Bob Haney don't care.
He's very good at it, though. You can't lie. It's it's a
it's a
brilliantly exciting and entertaining story of Batman and Plastic Man having to team up, having a bit of trouble, Plastic Man having some trauma, Batman getting his helicopter, cameo from Commissioner Gordon, trying to help, not realising. Fantastic.
It's so good.
It was all good.
And if Commissioner Gordon hadn't tried to help and blasted Plastic Man's head off, then this wouldn't have been resolved.
Exactly.
So it worked out for the best.
Well done, Commissioner Gordon and the lads.
Yes.
So there you go. Tremendous.
But even though there's no response to this story from the readers at the time, that doesn't stop you from getting in touch with us, telling us what you thought about this story. You can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and on Instagram at the Earth2Podcast, and on Twitter we're at podcast_Earth2, and we post up tons of bonus material on all three.
Yep, so check out Facebook and Instagram because as usual we'll post the cover and some selected panel highlights, and through the week we'll post some other relevant material as well, probably involving Batman and Plastic Man. I'm sure they will. Got an idea. Yeah, lots to come.
Excellent.
And of course, Plastic Man will return in the pages of Brave and the Bold. We'll probably do most of them, I think. Well, I'm not sure if we've decided if we're going to do them all, but we'll certainly do a couple of them.
Only one way to find out, and that's to subscribe to us.
Absolutely.
Or you could check out our website, that's theearth2podcast.com, where all of our shows are, this one and all the previous. So on that note, I've been Peter.
And I've been David. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on
The Earth 2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
No, Batman, I'm just stretching the old plastic corpuscles. Blah, 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 blah.